There are only two countries on Earth that are doubly landlocked, meaning you would have to cross not one border, but two before ever touching a coastline. Liechtenstein is one, Uzbekistan is the other. It is a nation roughly the size of California, sitting at the exact center of a continent, further from open sea than almost anywhere else on the planet. And yet for over 1,000 years, it was one of the most connected places on Earth. Picture the view from above. The Kizilkum Desert unfurling in pale gold to the north, its dunes rippling toward the horizon like a frozen sea. To the east, the Fergana Valley cuts a green wound through the mountains, one of the most densely farmed and densely peopled basins in all of Central Asia, ringed by the foothills of the Tian Shan and Pamir Alai ranges. Two great rivers, the Amu Darya and the Sir Darya, thread through this landscape like veins, rivers so ancient the Greeks knew them as the Oxus and the Jaxartes, rivers that once fed an inland sea and now barely reach it at all. This is a country built not around a coastline, but around an idea, the crossroads. For centuries, camel caravans loaded with silk, spice, porcelain, and paper passed through Samarkand and Bukhara on their way between China and the Mediterranean, and the cities that grew rich on that traffic, turquoise-domed, minaret-studded, scholar-filled, still stand today, their names known to travelers who have never set foot in Central Asia. Genghis Khan's armies swept through in the 13th century. Timur, the conqueror of the West calls Tamerlane, made Samarkand his capital in the 14th. And under his grandson, Ulugh Beg, an astronomer king, the city hosted one of the most advanced observatories of the medieval world. Empires rose and fell across this ground, and every one of them left something behind. In the architecture, in the language, in the blood. This is the story of life in Uzbekistan. In Uzbekistan, the day does not begin with an alarm clock so much as with bread. Before the sun has fully cleared the rooftops, ovens called tandirs are already glowing in courtyards and bakeries across the country, and the scent of fresh naan, the round stamped flatbread that anchors every Uzbek meal, drifts through the streets. Naan is never simply food here. It is treated with a kind of reverence bordering on the sacred. It is never placed upside down, never thrown away, never stepped over. A loaf broken and shared is, in a very real sense, a small act of hospitality repeated 100 times a day in 100,000 homes. The basic unit of community life in Uzbekistan is the mahalla, a self-governing neighborhood structure that predates the Soviet era and has outlived it. A mahalla is part administrative district, part extended family. Its elders settle disputes, its residents pool resources for weddings and funerals, and its committee often knows every household by name. In a mahalla, a wedding is not one family's event. It is the neighborhood's event, and everyone contributes, whether in food, labor, or money, according to an unwritten but deeply understood code of reciprocity. At the center of both daily commerce and daily conversation sits the bazaar. Tashkent's Chorsu Bazaar, with its vast blue-tiled dome, is perhaps the most famous, but nearly every city and town has its own version, a maze of stalls selling melons stacked in pyramids, dried apricots and raisins by the sackful, mountains of spices, blocks of freshly pressed cottonseed oil, and naan bread piled so high the vendors barely need to call out to sell it. The bazaar is where news travels, where prices are debated with theatrical seriousness, and where a stranger can be waved over by a stallholder simply to taste a slice of melon, no purchase required. Hospitality in Uzbekistan operates on a set of customs so deeply ingrained they barely need to be spoken. A guest is served before the host eats. Tea, usually green, poured from a small teapot into small bowl-like piola cups, is never filled to the brim, a deliberate gesture that invites the guest to stay and ask for more, prolonging the conversation rather than ending it. Refusing an offer of food outright is considered impolite. The ritual dance of "no please, you must" and "yes, all right, just a little" is a form of social choreography understood by everyone from childhood. Family structure remains largely multi-generational. It is common, particularly outside the largest cities, for the youngest son and his wife to remain in the family home to care for his aging parents, a tradition that shapes everything from housing patterns to inheritance customs. Grandparents are not peripheral figures here. They are often the ones who raise the youngest children while parents work, passing down language, proverbs, and religious practice in the same breath. Uzbek identity is woven, quite literally, into cloth. The city of Margolin, deep in the Fergana Valley, has produced ikat silk for centuries using a resist-dye technique in which threads are bound and dyed in patterns before they are ever woven, so that the design seems to bleed and blur across the fabric like watercolor. This fabric, known locally as atlas or adras depending on its blend, shows up in dresses, curtains, and increasingly in the collections of international fashion designers who have discovered what Uzbek weavers have known for 1,000 years. Traditional dress still appears constantly in daily life, not only at festivals. Men in rural areas and older generations often wear the chapan, a long quilted coat tied at the waist with a patterned sash, alongside the dapi, a square black and white embroidered skull cap whose pattern can indicate the wearer's home region. In Bukhara, the dapi's embroidery differs subtly from the one worn in Tashkent or Khiva, a kind of quiet regional signature stitched into cloth. Craft traditions run just as deep. In Rishtan, potters have worked the region's distinctive red clay for centuries, glazing it in the deep cobalt blue and turquoise that has become almost a visual shorthand for Uzbekistan itself. In Bukhara and Khiva, woodcarvers still hand-chisel elaborate geometric and floral patterns into doors, columns, and ceiling panels, techniques passed from master to apprentice largely unchanged since the medieval period. Suzani, large embroidered and decorative tribal textiles, traditionally stitched by women as part of a bride's dowry, hang in homes and museums alike, each one a kind of visual autobiography of the family that made it. Music carries its own lineage. The dutar, a long-necked, two-stringed lute, and the dwara, a large frame drum studded with metal rings that produce a shimmering rattle, are the backbone of Uzbek folk music, often accompanied by the tanbur and the reed flute known as the ney. At a more formal classical level, shashmakam, a centuries-old system of vocal and instrumental suites shared historically across the Persian-Turkic world, is still performed and taught, its intricate modal structures considered one of the great achievements of Central Asian art music. No celebration illustrates Uzbek identity more vividly than Navruz, the Persian New Year, celebrated at the spring equinox with public feasts, folk dancing, wrestling matches, and the communal cooking of sumalak, a sweet, slow-cooked paste made from sprouted wheat, stirred continuously through the night by neighbors taking turns around an enormous cauldron. A ritual as much about community endurance as about the dish itself. Weddings, too, remain elaborate multi-day affairs, often involving a religious nikah ceremony, a civil registration, and a lavish reception that can draw hundreds of guests, typically fed. Work and economy. For much of the 20th century, Uzbekistan's economy was built heavily around one crop, cotton. Under Soviet planning, the country became one of the world's largest cotton producers, a status locals still half-jokingly refer to as growing white gold. That legacy came at a steep cost. The Soviet-era push toward cotton monoculture diverted enormous volumes of water from the rivers feeding the Aral Sea, a decision whose consequences are still being felt today. In recent years, the government has moved to end forced and child labor in the cotton harvest, a reform recognized internationally, and has pushed to diversify agricultural output toward fruits, vegetables, and other export crops. Cotton, however, remains only part of the picture. Uzbekistan holds significant reserves of natural gas and gold, and mineral exports, including gold, copper, and uranium, now account for a major share of the country's foreign earnings. The economy has been growing rapidly in recent years, driven by a mix of state investment, rising exports, and reforms opening the country to foreign trade after decades of a comparatively closed, Soviet-style command economy. Manufacturing has expanded too. Automotive assembly, textiles, food processing, and machine building all now employ a meaningful share of the urban workforce, alongside a state sector that still looms large in daily economic life. Labor migration is a defining economic reality for many Uzbek families. Hundreds of thousands of Uzbek citizens, historically concentrated among working-age men, travel to Russia and other countries each year for seasonal or long-term work in construction, agriculture, and services, sending remittances home that make up a significant share of household income in many regions, particularly in the Fergana Valley. It is not unusual in some villages to find households where the husband spends much of the year abroad, his earnings arriving in installments that pay for a child's education or a family's new roof. Small-scale trade remains an economic backbone in its own right. Bazaars are not simply places of exchange. They are livelihoods, generational businesses passed from mother to daughter, stall to stall, in family lines that stretch back decades. Alongside them, a newer generation of entrepreneurs, particularly in Tashkent, has begun building tech startups, e-commerce platforms, and small manufacturing ventures aided by government efforts to ease business regulation and attract foreign investment. Cost of living and food. Life in Uzbekistan is, by regional standards, still relatively affordable, though prices have been rising steadily in recent years alongside the country's rapid economic growth. In Tashkent, renting a modest one-bedroom apartment outside the city center might run a family the equivalent of a few $100s a month, while in smaller cities and rural areas, housing costs drop considerably, and many families own their homes outright, often built and expanded across generations rather than purchased outright. Utilities, public transport, and basic groceries remain inexpensive relative to wages in wealthier countries, even as average monthly wages themselves remain modest by global comparison, a gap that helps explain why remittances from abroad matter so much to so many households. But it is at the table, not the ledger, that Uzbekistan reveals itself most fully. The national dish, without serious rival, is osh, more widely known abroad as plov, a majestic pilaf of rice, carrots, and meat, usually lamb or beef, slow-cooked in a wide cauldron called a kazan over an open flame, the rice absorbing hours of rendered fat and stock until every grain turns a deep amber. Tashkent-style plov differs from the version cooked in Samarkand or the Fergana Valley, each region defending its recipe with the kind of passionate loyalty usually reserved for sports teams. Plov is cooked for weddings, for funerals, for Friday gatherings, and for no reason at all beyond the fact that someone felt like cooking it. And in many households, it is still traditionally the men, not the women, who take charge of the kazan. Beyond plov, the Uzbek table runs deep. Lagman, a hand-pulled noodle dish rich with the influence of the country's ethnic Uyghur and Dungan communities, arrives in a savory broth, thick with vegetables and meat. Samsa, samosa-like pastries filled with minced meat, onion, and sometimes pumpkin, are baked, not fried, stuck to the inner walls of a tandoor oven until the pastry blisters and crisps. Shashlik, skewered and grilled meat, sizzles over charcoal at roadside stands and family courtyards alike, the smoke curling into evening air thick with the smell of cumin and grilled fat. Manti, delicate steamed dumplings, and naan themselves, baked in dozens of regional variations, round out a cuisine shaped by centuries of Silk Road exchange between Persian, Turkic, and Chinese culinary traditions. Meals here are rarely solitary. Even a modest weekday dinner tends to be eaten around a shared cloth or table spread, the dasturkhan, laden with bread, dried fruit, nuts, and tea long before the main dish ever arrives, a spread meant to signal that a guest, expected or not, will always be fed. Nature and outdoor life. Uzebekistan's geography is a study in extremes. Nearly 4/5 of the country is desert or semi-arid steppe, dominated by the Kizilkum, the Red Sands, a vast expanse stretching between the Amudarya and Sirdarya rivers, where summer temperatures can climb past 40 degrees Celsius and winter nights drop well below freezing. In the country's east, the land rises sharply into the foothills of the Tian Shan and Pamir Alai mountain systems, offering a startlingly different climate. Alpine meadows, glacial-fed streams, and peaks that draw hikers and climbers, particularly around the Chimgan Mountains, a popular weekend escape from Tashkent's summer heat. This climate of extremes, scorching, dry summers and cold, often snowy winters, shapes daily and seasonal rhythms in ways visitors rarely anticipate. Agricultural life in the Fergana Valley and along the river valleys revolves around a short but intensely productive growing season, irrigation channels dug and maintained by hand in many villages, following water-sharing systems that in some cases predate Soviet infrastructure by centuries. Summer heat pushes daily life earlier and later, with the hottest midday hours reserved for rest and social and market activity concentrated in the cooler morning and evening. No environmental story looms larger over Uzbekistan's landscape than the Aral Sea. Once one of the 4 largest lakes on Earth, it has shrunk to a fraction of its former size since the mid-20th century, as Soviet irrigation projects diverted the rivers that fed it toward cotton fields. What remains in the Uzbek portion, near the town of Moynak, is a haunting landscape of rusted fishing boats stranded on what is now desert sand, a stark and sobering monument to the cost of large-scale agricultural ambition. Reforestation projects using salt-tolerant shrubs have since been undertaken on the exposed seabed, an attempt to hold the drifting, salt-laced dust in place. Getting around Uzbekistan means moving between eras almost by the hour. In Tashkent, the metro, the first underground rail system built anywhere in Central Asia, opened in 1977, still carries commuters beneath ornately tiled, chandelier-lit stations that function as much as public art galleries as transit stops. Above ground, modern buses and a growing number of ride-hailing apps have become part of daily urban life, particularly among younger residents who increasingly book rides and order groceries from their phones rather than walking to the bazaar. Between cities, the Afrosiab high-speed train, named for the ancient citadel at the heart of Samarkand, connects Tashkent to Samarkand and Bukhara in a fraction of the time older Soviet-era rail lines once required, a symbol of the country's push toward modernization and tourism. Yet step outside the major rail corridors and older forms of transport persist. Shared taxis called marshrutkas still shuttle passengers between towns along fixed routes, and in more remote rural areas, donkey carts remain a practical way to move goods along unpaved roads that modern vehicles struggle to navigate. Technology adoption has accelerated sharply over the past decade. Smartphone use is now widespread even in smaller towns. Mobile banking has begun to replace cash transactions for a growing share of the population, and internet access, once tightly restricted, has expanded considerably as the government has pursued digital economy reforms. Still, the contrast between old and new rarely disappears entirely. It is common to see a grandmother in a traditional embroidered Doppy video calling a grandson working construction in Russia, the ancient and the instantaneous sharing the same small screen. Uzbekistan is, demographically, a young country. A majority of its roughly 38 million people are under the age of 30, and that youthfulness is reshaping ambitions in ways the previous generation did not experience. Education is highly valued. Families often make considerable sacrifices to support a child through university, whether at institutions in Tashkent or, increasingly, abroad in Russia, South Korea, Turkey, or further afield, as international scholarship and exchange programs have expanded since the mid-2000s reform period. That expanded opportunity comes bundled with a familiar tension. Many young Uzbeks now pursue careers their parents never imagined in software development, digital marketing, tourism, and finance, professions that barely existed in the country a generation ago, and that draw ambitious graduates toward Tashkent's growing tech and business districts. At the same time, the pull of tradition remains strong. Parental approval still weighs heavily on major life decisions, from choice of career to choice of spouse, and the expectation that children, particularly sons, will care for aging parents has not disappeared, even as urban migration pulls families apart geographically. Migration itself splits along two paths. Some of Uzbekistan's most educated young people leave for study or long-term careers abroad, part of a broader regional pattern of talent-seeking opportunity beyond Central Asia's borders. Others migrate seasonally for manual labor, following the same routes to Russia their fathers and older brothers once took, a path less glamorous but no less essential to the household budgets back home. Both forms of departure carry an unspoken hope of eventual return. A new apartment built in the home village, a small business started with savings sent home over years, a family reunited on more comfortable terms than the ones that sent a young person away in the first place. Evening and daily rhythm. As the punishing heat of a summer afternoon begins to loosen its grip, Uzbekistan visibly exhales. Streets that stood nearly empty at midday fill again. Children reappear on bicycles. Elderly men set out low wooden benches called supa in courtyards and along shaded streets, and the clatter of dominoes and card games starts up in tea houses known as chaykhanas. This is the hour when the day's real socializing happens, unhurried and largely unplanned, built around whoever happens to wander by. Dinner tends to stretch long into the evening, especially in summer, when families eat outdoors beneath grape trellises strung across courtyards, the fruit hanging low enough to pick without standing. Tea returns again and again throughout the evening, poured, sipped, refilled, less a beverage at this point than a pretext for staying seated a little longer, for letting one more story be told before the household finally turns towards sleep. In the mahalla, evening is also when communal obligations tend to surface. A neighbor stopping by to discuss an upcoming wedding contribution, an elder mediating a small dispute over a shared wall or water access, news of a birth or death moving from courtyard to courtyard, faster than any official announcement could travel. By the time the call to prayer sounds from a neighborhood mosque in the diminishing light, much of the day's real business, social, familial, communal, has already quietly concluded. Challenges of life. Life in Uzbekistan is not without real hardship, and honesty requires naming it directly. Water scarcity remains one of the country's most pressing long-term challenges, a legacy of decades of Soviet-era cotton irrigation that has left both the Aral Sea and many regional water tables severely depleted. Climate change and rising regional demand for the same shared rivers are expected to intensify the pressure in the years ahead. Farmers in some districts already report shorter, less predictable growing seasons and reduced water allocations, forcing difficult decisions about which crops a family can still afford to plant. Economic pressures weigh heavily as well. Despite rapid GDP growth in recent years, wages in much of the country remain modest by international standards, and inflation has, at times, outpaced income growth, squeezing household budgets even as the broader economy expands. This gap helps explain the scale of labor migration to Russia and elsewhere, a system that sustains many families financially while also separating parents from children and spouses from each other for months or years at a stretch, a quiet, ongoing social cost rarely captured in economic statistics. Urbanization is reshaping the country as well, drawing young people from villages toward Tashkent and other cities in search of education and employment, and leaving some rural communities visibly older and thinner than they were a generation ago. And while the government has pursued significant political and economic reforms since the mid-2000s, opening currency markets, courting foreign investment, easing some long-standing restrictions, Uzbekistan is still navigating the transition from a tightly centralized, Soviet-inherited system toward a more open one, a process that, like any transition of this scale, unfolds unevenly and incompletely. And yet, ask people in Uzbekistan why they stay, even those with every practical reason to leave. And the answers rarely mention economics at all. They speak, instead of the mahalla, of neighbors who have known them since birth and will show up unasked when a wedding or a funeral requires help. They speak of parents and grandparents who are growing older and who they cannot imagine leaving to someone else's care. They speak of land that has belonged to a family for generations, of a courtyard grapevine planted by a grandfather now decades gone, of a language and a rhythm of life that does not translate cleanly into any other country, no matter how much higher the wages might be there. There is a particular kind of belonging that comes from being known, not by an algorithm, not by a resume, but by an entire neighborhood who remembers your childhood, your parents' childhood, and will remember your children's as well. In Uzbekistan, that belonging is not incidental to daily life. It is the architecture underneath it, as load-bearing as any wall. Uzbekistan sits, as it always has, at a crossing point, not just of ancient trade routes, but of eras. It is a country where a woman may weave ikat silk on a loom her grandmother used, then check her phone for the exchange rate on the son's remittance from Moscow, where a high-speed train glides past irrigation channels dug by hand generations ago, where the tiled domes of Samarkand, built to honor a 14th century conqueror, now shelter travelers who arrive by budget airline rather than camel caravan. The desert has not moved. The mountains have not moved. The rivers, diminished as they are, still trace the same paths they always have, feeding fields and cities that have depended on them since before written history reached this part of the world. What has changed and continues to change is what the people living here choose to build on that unmoving foundation. How they balance the pull of Tashkent's opportunities against the gravity of a home village. How they carry forward a recipe for plav or a pattern of embroidery while also building a startup or studying abroad. This is Uzbekistan, ancient and unfinished, landlocked twice over yet connected in ways both old and new to nearly everywhere on Earth. The caravans have stopped, but the crossroads remains. Thank you for spending this time with us in Uzbekistan, for the bread, the tea, the desert wind, and the quiet strength of its people. If this journey moved you even a little, consider subscribing for more stories in our Living In series, where we travel beyond the postcards to find out what daily life actually feels like in places most of the world only glimpses in passing. Next time, we head somewhere entirely different. Until then, safe travels.